Hey everybody, it's Rob here from Rob and Jonas's Filmmaking Tips. Today, I'm talking about how to take this photo and turn it into this photo. All of this basically relates to how do you take that amazing action shot that you can sell or you can put up as a thumbnail to your video like we did here, or in your Instagram feed like I did on my Instagram feed. And obviously there's an infinite number of ways that you could do these shots. For me, I really like using these GoPro cameras, and in part that's because you can get shots that nobody else has seen before. And that's kind of what I did with this shot. In fact, I took a whole bunch of other shots. This is another one of my favorites. I just like the framing on it. But for today's tutorial, I will specifically be talking about the post-processing of this image. Now notice, I'm just gonna switch back and forth here. Do you see how the original image is totally different than the other one? Now the new Hero 5 GoPros do shoot in RAW, which is really important. This particular shot was not shot in RAW, it was actually shot with the Hero 4, which creates a JPEG image, but you can still pull a lot out, and that's kind of what I want to show you guys today. Now, before I get into the actual post-processing of it, let me just kind of give you some background on how this thing was shot. My parents have a little house on a lake in Texas that I like to go back to, take my kids to. I have two kids who just love spending time at the lake, kind of like when I was a little kid. My eldest is 5 and he's starting to get into jumping in the water and playing around. And my youngest is only 2 and he's just kind of taking everything in and being amazed by the fish and the water. And he's just super cute. Of course, I take video of the whole thing. Now with the wakeboarding shots, I basically took a sticky mount, took that GoPro, stuck it to the back of the wakeboard and kind of angled it up so that it would get myself skiing. And then I set it to time-lapse mode to take a shot every half second. And so it was just shooting. See, these are some of the images I got. Like this one right here is when August and I are getting ready to go. And then as we start to get up, you know, you start to get shots like this. And every once in a while I'd tell him to look back at me, wave at the camera. And he created some really neat photos. You know, and this is like we fell and he was looking at the camera. All of these are just really cool, and depending on which direction you're going, it's maybe more or less in exposure. Like these look pretty nice because they're well set up. I like this one because the sun is actually behind us and we're carving back and forth. And August is just like digging this whole thing. So let me show you, like, okay, this shot, we let go of the rope and we looked back at the camera, and then I turned it into this. Now you might notice it looks so much better once I've post-processed it. And that gets us to kind of this shot, which is the one that I took and made it into this one. And obviously that is a huge difference. And this really gets to my main point, is that when you're taking action shots, you have to keep in mind how you're going to post-process them. A lot of times you want to just make sure that you're not overexposing it, because you can't bring a lot out of the overexposed sections. Like behind August here, this sun, that's about as much as I could get out of it. And that's okay, because you'll notice in this image, August and I are pretty dark, the sky pretty bright, but we were able to bring it all back with some interesting techniques. So in today's tutorial, while I could do a lot of it in Lightroom, I actually want to go into Photoshop and show you how to do some advanced masking techniques. All right, let's open up Photoshop and get started. Now I've already created a document. I'll keep all of it hidden right now. I have a separate group, which is my end result here, but I'm gonna work just with this particular image. First of all, I like to make a couple of duplicates. Command J on the Mac, and that creates a duplicate layer for me to work with. For me, this is always my backup, and I'll just call it backup layer, where I'm not going to touch. And this layer I can start manipulating. In fact, I like to create 2 backups. The first thing I like to do in a photo like this is to use my camera raw filter, which is very similar to Lightroom. So I go up here to filter, and then I go to camera raw filter. Okay, so it pops up, and for those of you that use Lightroom, this is going to be very similar. Now when I shoot with the GoPro, the sharpness is set to low, so I always like to add a little bit of clarity, which kind of sharpens it up just a little bit. In this particular case, I'm going to bring down my highlights as much as they will go, because that's the sky. I like to bring up the shadows, more or less, as much as they will go, because that's August and I. And then I'm gonna increase the exposure just a bit and the contrast just a bit, because that will make August and I pop. But I also want to make sure that I'm exposing just for us. The sky is going to suffer just a little bit, but that's okay. Now when you add clarity, you're going to lose a little bit of your colors, so I like to add some vibrancy. You don't want to do too much. That looks ridiculous. Some people go way overboard. See how flat that looks? You just want to give it a little bit of a pop. I like my images to be nice and colorful, but not look overly post-processed. All right, and then we'll click OK, save that. And already we're looking pretty darn good. But a couple of things that I want to do are, we were on kind of a muddy looking lake, so I kind of want to make that lake pop. I want to kind of give it a deep, rich green, blue color. And I also want to work on the sky. Now, each of these are going to be separately, we're going to put a mask on them and then kind of merge everything back together, okay? So from this original image that I took, these are going to be our two backups. Let's just drop them into a folder and we'll call backup layers. Now from each of these layers, we'll call this base layer people. And then we're going to create two more layers. That's Command J to do those. And then we'll call this water. And we'll call this one sky. And for each of these, we're going to put a mask on them and start working with it. Now you could add just an adjustment layer focused on that, but because I've created new layers, I kind of like to just work with the image. It makes the whole thing a little bit cleaner. I'm a little bit old school too. That's why I do it like that. No rhyme or reason to it. Again, there's thousands of ways to do everything in Photoshop. This is just my workflow. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation. So what I'm going to do is, in particular, I'm going to look at the yellows, because that water is very yellow, and I'm going to kind of put it towards the green or the blue. Actually, oh gosh, wow, that looks sweet. I don't want it to go crazy blue because it wasn't blue, so maybe we'll just kind of go towards the green. There we go. That looks cool. Okay, so this is kind of our water. Then we click OK. All right, now we have this layer. It looked ridiculous for everything else, but I think the water looks really nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask. That's this button right here. Now the way the layer mask works, this is important for you to understand, is that you can paint black and white onto just the layer mask, and depending on the color, it will shine through or not be visible. And what you can see over here is that it's all white, which indicates that everything is present. But watch this. I'm going to move over here to my tablet. If I take the brush tool and I make it really big and I say paint the sky, sky doesn't change things that much. And I'll be a little bit sloppy, how about? We'll just kind of go right here over my foot and stuff. Now if you look over here, the only places that are coming through are the water. Now I was really sloppy in this region, so what I'll do is I'll take my white and I'll come back and get a little more precise. And I have a little bit of a feather on this brush. If you'll notice here, it's actually, the hardness is set to 0. So it's actually feathered quite a lot. So all I do is just kind of paint around, and I don't have to be super precise. That's the great thing, because I was just adjusting the colors a little bit. But if I want to go back in and get really precise, I can. And you know, I might, and I can switch back and forth between the black and the white and just make sure that it doesn't look weird on the legs, because that's really important. I do the same on the boots. Don't want them looking all weird and funky yellow. So now this is our water, and we can go back to this layer. We can adjust the opacity. We can do whatever we want to it. I think I will tone it down. It was a little bit too rich. Maybe not too much. Okay, now we'll go with the sky. Now notice when I turn on this layer, everything feels like it goes back to normal. So I'm going to add my layer mask by clicking there. And just for fun, before I get started, I'm going to mask out on the water. Okay, so now it's more or less just the sky, but let's go ahead and focus just on making that pop. So what I'm going to do is go back to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Oops, click on my image. Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Okay, now let's only look at the sky. All right, what I'm thinking, let's go over to split toning. Let's add a little bit of color to the sky, because it was sunset and it was a beautiful color, but it didn't pick up so much. Let's add a little bit of saturation to the sky at like the orange or yellow, probably in the yellowy orange region. Something like that. It's pretty nice. Let's go back to our basic tab. Let's kind of make this thing pop with a little bit of contrast. take the highlights down a little bit, which generally makes the whole thing kind of like really pop. Maybe something like this. Let's go back to split toning. I think it needs a little more saturation. I know this is looking kind of ridiculous on me, but the sky I think is looking really cool. The trick is you don't want it to look too weird, but you want it to look like just right. Ugh. It's really hard to get just right, I'd be totally honest with you. Now the way split toning works, it will allow you to kind of change the color of either the highlights or the darks. In this case, I want to kind of look at the lights and I want to add quite a bit of color to them. I think something like that will probably work okay. So let's click OK. Just bring us back to the original image. So there you have it. We've got that nice sky, but because we haven't worked on the mask yet, August and I are pretty dark. Now let's take our mask and start painting black and white on it. So white's going to be anything that shows through, and I'm just going to be a little bit sloppy at first because I want to get all of August and I. And it is interesting because we are a little bit bluer. Okay, now if I do a sloppy mask like this, notice how August and I have this weird rim halo effect thing. We don't want that, so we're going to go back to the black. I'm going to be a little more precise just to make it not halo-y. This is where it's really nice for me to have a pen because I can do it much quicker. It's really hard to do it if you just have a mouse. Now as I'm fine-tuning this, let me just tell you a little bit about how Jonas and I work with these GoPros. First of all, you may or may not know that we are GoPro correspondents. Basically, they love the science content that we were doing, and we do a lot of self-shooting with GoPros. And so they invited us to come out, and we've been working with them hand in hand for quite a while now. But I'll be totally honest with you, at first I didn't use my GoPro in my toolkit all that much because it is, to some degree, a little bit easier to work with a DSLR with a zoom lens. You can zoom back and forth. But GoPros take such awesome shots when you work with them differently. And by that, I mean you kind of set up GoPros like you're setting up a trap. So in the case of the wakeboard photo here, I knew that I was going to get an awesome shot as I was carving. So I attached it to the front of the camera and I let it start going on time-lapse mode. And I just carved back and forth with August here. And eventually we got that killer shot. But that's what I'm talking about. You have to set traps up. And the thing is, these GoPros are just as good as about any other camera. But the trick is you got to do some of the post-processing like I'm doing here. And then it will become just an amazing shot. I'm still not totally happy with the shot though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple more adjustment layers. First one is going to be a curves adjustment layer. Okay, so I think this shot needs the lights to be a little bit brighter. You can keep the contrast down by keeping the blacks down. You want it to pop. But I think just a little bit more brightness is probably what it needs. Now the great thing with these adjustment layers is that I put an adjustment layer right here and it affects everything downstream. So it's affecting my sky, my water, my base layer. And I can add any number of adjustment layers by just going down here and clicking on this one. Maybe I wanted to add a little bit more brightness and contrast, or I want to just change the exposure or the vibrancy. Any of these I can add and then be able to go back, click them on and off if I don't like them later. So that's the nice thing about adjustment layers. And I could probably spend a little bit more time on these photos, but it kind of gets my point across, that being, if you take shots where you know you're going to have some brights and darks, post-processing is really important. So there you go. I did put this image on my Instagram account, which you can follow right here. Also make sure to check out Jonas's, which is Behind the Science. Stay tuned. In the coming months, we're going to show you more tips and tricks on how to take amazing photos and adjust them in post-production. You guys seem to really enjoy those. Also, remember the channel is Filmmaking Tips. And the reason we're spending a lot of time on Photoshop and Lightroom and working with images is that I think becoming a good filmmaker has a lot to do with understanding the basics of composition and how to work with images. And all of that really starts in Photoshop. And then you can take that and you can translate it to your filmmaking. Okay, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next Tuesday.